All right, good morning, everybody. Let's jump into Daniel. Let's jump into the book of Daniel. Tell me, when you hear about Daniel, what are some of the things that come to your mind when we talk about Daniel? Daniel. Let me see a hand or two. Anybody? Sister April. The lion, yeah. And what happened with Daniel and the lion? we know Daniel. Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, wasn't he? Yeah, my man Daniel. Okay. What's another thing that we remember about Daniel? Brother Myra? Yeah.
The name change.
Okay. We're going to talk about that today, about his name being changed. Okay. Anything else that stand out about Daniel? If someone off the street just asked you about Daniel, what would you say about him? Yes, ma'am.
He was a man that tried to obey God.
Okay, he took a stand, and we're gonna talk about that as well. All right, good. Okay, I always like to do background before we actually get into the text that we're going to look at. I want you to know the Bible and know who Daniel was. I had a handout in the back in the foyer. There may still be some available. And we're just looking at the historical setting of Daniel as well. An understanding of the historical background. And I also sent this by email. I know one sister said she don't check her email, and but you need to check your email because you might get something. you might really get something. But an understanding of the historical background of the book of Daniel is essential for a proper understanding of his message. Now, we're probably going to cover maybe the first 7 chapters and not the whole book. There are some apocalyptic language in Daniel, and that might be a little difficult or boring to us. But there's a lot of stories in the first 7 chapters. What I want to keep before us is learning the Bible, and learning the Bible is learning the stories. There's a story, and if you learn that story, then you just tell the story. So we're just repeating the story. It's not so much that you got to be a scholar. Scholarship is good and important, and it has its place, but you just have to be able to retell the story of what happened in the Bible. So I want you to be able to retell the story of Daniel. Daniel was born during the last days of the king of Judah. He was a teenager. When we read about him in chapter 1, he's a teenager. Most people land at 15. You'll find some other people that say maybe 14, but we know that he is a teenager when we look at that. That's real important, because when we start looking at his stand, he's not a grown man taking a stand, but he's a teenager, which gives me the impression that he had parents who taught him the will of God. And now we're going to read about Daniel being in Babylonian captivity, but remembering what he had been taught. And then taking a stand independent of where his parents were. So the title of the lesson is New Names in a Strange Land. But he's about 15 years of age when he was taken captive in 605 BC. Josiah would have been reigning at the time of Daniel's birth. When Josiah died, his son Jehoahaz became king, but Jehoahaz only stayed as king for about 3 months. Jehoiakim, who was the eldest son of Josiah, became king on the throne of Judah. And then we're going to find that Nebuchadnezzar came in and his Babylonian forces invaded and subdued Judah. So let's turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 36. And all of this is just background information, background information. And I'm going to read this from the Christian Standard Bible. Second Chronicles chapter 36. Then the common people took Jehoahaz, son of Josiah, made him king in Jerusalem in place of his father. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. The king of Egypt deposed him in Jerusalem and fined the land 7,500 pounds of silver and 75 pounds of gold. Then King Necho of Egypt made Jehoahaz's brother Eliakim king over Judah and Jerusalem, and changed Eliakim's name to Jehoiakim. But Necho took his brother Jehoahaz and brought him to Egypt. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, his God. Now King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon attacked him and bound him in bronze shackles to take him to Babylon. Also, Nebuchadnezzar took some of the articles of the Lord's temple to Babylon and put them in his temple in Babylon. The rest of the deeds of Jehoiakim, the detestable actions he committed, and what was found against him are written in the book of Israel's kings. His son Jehoiakim became king in his place. When you read the book of Daniel, what we're going to find is that God, being sovereign, is going to use a pagan, how can I say it, to punish his people. His people had committed sin, and God is going to use someone outside the covenant to get them set right. That's important. That's important to understand, because God can use anybody to get his people right. I probably need to come back to that, but God can use anybody to get his people right. And but the emphasis, Brother Myrick, is that the people had done wrong. That's right. And you can't do wrong and not be punished for it. You're going to find even in the book of Daniel that the punishment is going to last 70 years. And there's a lot of talk about that 70-year captivity. But think about the punishment that the people have to go through that affects generations that follow them. See, the thing about it is the people sin and then they die, but after their death, their children have to suffer the consequences. But even with the children suffering the consequences, Daniel still made a firm commitment to serve the Lord. In this first section that talks about the last days of Judah, I'm picking up where it says, at this time Daniel and his friends were taken into captivity. Now we can turn over to Daniel chapter 1. The book of Daniel is considered one of the major prophets, book of major prophets. Not that Daniel was more important than the other prophets, but it's called a major prophet because of the length of the book, the volume of the book. Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and the book of Jeremiah would be considered the major prophets, and they're major because of the length of the book. Daniel and his friends are taken into captivity. Jehoiakim promised loyalty to Nebuchadnezzar, but he rebelled, and that brought the wrath of Babylon upon the nation. He would die, Jehoiakim died mysteriously during Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Jerusalem. His son Jehoiakim reigned for 3 months. After surrendering the city of Jerusalem to Nebuchadnezzar, Jehoiakim was taken captive to Babylon along with 10,000 Judean citizens, including the prophet Ezekiel. You find it, what we read in 2 Chronicles chapter 36 about these different kings that came up and defied the king. They defied Babylonian authority. And Nebuchadnezzar made up his mind that he was going to end all this rebellion. Brother Patterson prays, when he prays, he'll mention about the armed forces. He'll mention about what's going on in the Ukraine. So if you kind of think about that, think about Russia coming over to America, taking some of us captive back to Russia. And then when they take us back to Russia, getting some of the best young men and then training them in the culture of Russia. I was looking, none of us, they wouldn't pick none of us because we ain't young. They wouldn't pick us because we're not young. We might get Dion's, is it Dion's? Yeah, they might pick Dion's back there because he's a young man, you know. They pick Devin because Devin is young. If Devin, you know, we now here's the story. Here's the story. If that happened, we would want Dion's and Devin to know God's word well enough that they would take a stand. And so that means that as parents, we have to do a lot of good teaching. And it's one thing to take a stand when there's no pressure, but it's another thing to take a stand when your life is on the line. So let's do a little bit reading of, you'll find in this handout an outline, and I really want to focus on the name change, but I want to do a little reading. Look at the theological emphasis. The theology of the book of Daniel centers around several key themes. Without doubt, the principal theological focus is the sovereignty of God. Sovereignty simply means God is in control. God rules. So even when Nebuchadnezzar takes Judah captive, God is still in control. He's in control, and the people had to remember that. I'm in a strange land. I'm held captive, but God is still in control. And someone may ask, how can God be in control and I'm in captivity? Well, I'm in captivity because somebody sinned. And there's consequences to that. But God can still make a way even though we're in captivity. God is the Lord of individuals. He's the Lord of nations. He's the Lord of all history. In the first 6 chapters, Yahweh is set forth as the God who rules over the kings and nations of the earth. In chapter 1, God's sovereignty delivers Jehoiakim into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, protects his followers in Babylon. God is sovereign over history, especially in chapters 2 and 5. God's sovereignty over the power and decrees of earthly kings is demonstrated by his deliverance of the 3 Hebrews from the fiery furnace. God is going to humiliate Nebuchadnezzar, because even though you took my people captive, they still my people. And chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar is going to have this dream, and it shows the humiliation of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel is going to serve under several kings. Nebuchadnezzar, Darius are 2 of the kings. Belshazzar is another king. So different kings are going to come on the scene, and Daniel's going to be steady. He's just going to be steady. He's just steady. Just even though he's serving under a different king, he's still Daniel, a man of God. It doesn't matter where I am, doesn't matter about what's going on in the culture. I'm still going to be what my parents taught me. I'm going to hold to God's unchanging hand. Chapter 6 is the rescue of Daniel from the lions. And then you see an outline here. All right, let's read some Bible. Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. The Lord handed King Jehoiakim of Judah over to him, along with some of the vessels from the house of God. Nebuchadnezzar carried them to the land of Babylon, to the house of his God, and put the vessels in the treasury of his God. So Nebuchadnezzar is a pagan. He does not believe in the Hebrew God, and that's got to be uncomfortable. I remember when I was in school working on my doctorate. They would have these week intensives where you'd have to go on campus and from Monday through Friday. And on Wednesday, they would have a service. They would have a service. And man, I always felt uncomfortable at that Wednesday service. So it was part of my training. And, they would play the piano and sing these songs, and man, I'm just sitting there, and I couldn't get into it. I couldn't. I'm sitting there. They sang, but I couldn't. I just felt so out of place. Has anybody ever felt like that? Yeah, Bro Russ, yeah.
Was it because of the music?
Yeah. It was because of the music, and now they're great people. They're great people, and I'm friends with some of my classmates, my instructors I stay in touch with. They follow me on Facebook, and they'll acknowledge my birthday and my anniversary and all that kind of stuff. We do all that. But when Wednesday came, man, I could just I wanted to slide under the table. I never rebuked them because I'm at their school, but I just felt uncomfortable because I could not sincerely participate because that's not what I believe and not what I teach. Yes, ma'am.
I invite people to worship service, give them a handout, but I often wonder, and I think I know what I'm going to do. If someone says, so you come to my worship service, okay, I'll come to yours, and I want you to come to mine.
Yeah.
And so I often wonder, but I'm going to reject, because I will feel out of place.
Yeah. I remember when I was in California, I was doing an evangelistic series, and there was a sister, and you're quite different from this sister, who kind of went back and forth with me because she mentioned that I made the statement that I don't bargain with people when it comes to salvation. I'll go to your church if you come to mine, because I'm taking the position that I have the truth. And I want to expose you to the truth. I already know what you're doing. I don't have to tell them that, but I already know what's going on over there. And I can tell them from the Bible. So this sister, I can still see her today. I can see where I was standing, where she was sitting, and she just felt like, well, she should go with them to get them to come with us, and then she could show them what they're different. Well, you could already do that without going. You already know. You already know. I'm gonna tell you, like David Jones would tell me sometime when he's talking, you're a grown man, you can do what you want to do. Now that's after he done gave me his advice. He done gave me his advice, then he said, now you grown, you can do what you want to do. So my thing is, we have the truth, and you have to be like Daniel, and you have to, it's something about your truth that is attractive. And you have to find a way not to be offensive, but you have to be like the Jehovah's Witnesses. They will not come into our building because of what they believe and teach. They ain't worried about, well, I'll try to win you by coming to your place of worship. They are so committed to what they believe that they won't step out. And when I used to talk to Jehovah's Witnesses, and I got tired of talking with them, I said, yeah, I'll have a Bible study. Meet me at my church. And I know already they ain't going to do it. All right, that's why I said, come on, yeah, 2106 Arlington Road. That's where I attend worship, So what I'm just suggesting, but we're all grown. And I probably should have took this approach with this sister, because we were going like back and forth. And I'm saying, sis, there's just a better way to win people, because I'm thinking, are you going to miss your service to go to their service when you won't feel good work? Now, I'm in a school setting. I'm in school, and they are doing that. Now, I don't feel like I sinned, but I sure felt uncomfortable in that setting. But the point that I was trying to make is Nebuchadnezzar took the belongings of God's people and put it in his temple. So he took the vessels from the house of God, carried them to the land of Babylon, to the house of his God, and put the vessels in the treasury of his God. Okay? The king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family, from the nobility. So he's being very selective. I don't want anybody. I want the best. Verse 4, young men without any physical defect, good-looking, suitable for instruction in all wisdom, knowledgeable, perceptive, and capable of serving in the king's palace. He was to teach them in the Chaldean language and literature. What he's really trying to do is like the Russians invading us, taking us back over there, and then they want to restructure us. One of our teachers came up with a good point in their lesson plan, and they talked about the deconstruction of God's best. They call it, they're trying to deconstruct God's best. What that means is, I'm taking you away from the place you are familiar, and I'm going to train and teach you. Now, you may not see it now, but the same thing is happening now where we are members of the Church of Christ, and there are other folk now trying to reprogram us and get us to think that what we were teaching is wrong and they're right. That's a deconstruction and a reprogramming. No, we wasn't wrong when it comes to doctrine or worship. Now, we're not perfect. There's some things that we have worked on, but what we believe and teach, your mind needs to be made up. That's why I went to Church of Christ schools, Baptist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, and I learned things, but none of those things took me away from my belief in the one Lord, one faith, and one baptism. You got to know that going in. You got to know that. This is not what my mama taught me. This is not what my preacher taught. This is not what you got to get it. So when we talk about instrumental music, you got to get that and it stick with you. When it comes to the roles that we have in the church, you got to get it, you got to stick with it, and you got to realize that there's a deconstruction and reprogramming taking place. But we're going to find, and they want the best. And what's happening now is we've got some young preachers who are the best. Man, these young guys, man, run circles around us, and they're the best. And what's happening, and I'm sharing history with you, what's happening is there's a group of Christians who don't look like us who are having fellowship with the Christian church. And this group of Christians that don't look like us are having fellowship with the Christian church, and they're influencing young preachers to abandon what they learned so that we can have open fellowship with denominations. That's what's happening. Now, that's what's happening. We can cut through all the chase and all the conversation that we're having. The bottom line is there's a move for open fellowship. Daniel is in a new, strange place, but he does not worship Nebuchadnezzar's God. Now, that's what I'm trying to say to y'all. What I'm trying to say to y'all is you can be in a strange place, but you got to know who you are. And even if they change your name, I'm running out of time, so I'm moving fast. Even if if they change your name, you got to remember what your real name is, Brother Woodley. And then,
well, I always thought, I tell people, like in Daniel's situation, the Bible says the devil is divided in this world. And I believe that the devil can get the smartest and most intelligent young folk, and he can destroy a whole generation.
and the thing about it is, and that's, is it Judges, where it talks about Joshua dying, and there arose another generation which didn't know what God had done through Moses. So my kids or my grandkids' kids ought to know what we believe. You gotta keep teaching it. You gotta keep teaching it. And it just ain't doctrine, y'all. It's not just doctrine. It even has to do with morality. I saw somebody on Facebook or TikTok, they were criticizing Obama. And we're happy that a black man became president of the United States. But Obama's politics on some issues go against what the Bible teaches. I'm glad, I'm happy for the black man, but the Rainbow Coalition and the same-sex marriages, that he opened the door to, those things go against Scripture. So it's not just doctrine, it has to do with morality. And you got to know who you are. You can't let folk change your name, okay? So these four men that come to the forefront, they're handsome, they come from royal families, they're intelligent, they're well-informed, and the king realized that these young men had great potential to serve in his kingdom. So I'm going to teach them a new language. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with learning a new language. Customs, laws, literature, ain't nothing wrong with all of that. But notice how these men were treated. They were given new names. Let's see. So y'all remember Roots? And I just keep telling this story over. I know y'all done heard this before. When they brought Kuta Kinte over here, what did they do? Change his name, right? Why did they change his name? Yeah, you belong to us now. Erase your identity. Erase who you come from. And you remember, and they were just beating Kunte. They were whipping him. What's your name? He just kept saying, Kunte. They just kept whipping him. And sometimes it's like that. You just keep getting the blows until you finally give in. And finally, he finally said his name was what? Toby. And so like they finally done broke him, So we can't get broke. You cannot get broke. Let me get to here because I want to give you the names. I think y'all may already know it. Verse number 5. The king assigned to them daily provisions from the royal food and from the wine that he drank. They were to be trained for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to attend to the king. Among them from the Judaites were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That's their real names. All right? So you got to remember what your real name is. Your real name. I was teasing somebody, or maybe I did it in my sermon, teasing about, what's your government name? Everybody got a government name. Your government name is what's on your birth certificate. That's your government name, Among them from the Judites were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. And then the chief eunuch gave them names. And there's a strategy here, y'all. All of this is strategy. And sometimes we forget there's a scheme and there's a strategy, all right? He gave the name Belshazzar to Daniel, Shadrach to Hananiah, Meshach to Mishael, and Abednego to Azariah. Now, next week, your task, your assignment is to find out what their names mean. Find out what their names meant, their Hebrew names meant, and then find out what the Babylonian name meant. Okay? Everybody got that? Got some work to do. Yeah. All right. So there we got something you want to tell us? No. It just looked like you got just look like it's about to come out of you. All right. You got some work to do, but now remind me that y'all got some work to do. But next week, we're going to look at 1:8 because Daniel purpose in his heart. And really, I already kind of gave you the answer, but still I want y'all to do some work, okay? Any questions about Daniel, the first 7 verses? Any questions or comments about Daniel? Okay. Just remember who you are. Remember that there's, we used to talk about there was a conspiracy against the black nation, or against black folk. There's a conspiracy against Christianity. And when we were at the lectureship this year, Brother Washington mentioned how there's a group called the, well, we're on social media, I got to be politically correct. There's a group that's loaning money to churches of the Restoration faith. The Restoration faith is bigger than Church of Christ, but it also includes the Christian church. But we were told that there has always been a movement among some to recruit young blacks, black preachers. And our pioneers or our legends fought that move. But now the younger preachers are buying into the move. And what's happening is the open fellowship. And we're living in some dangerous times. We're living in some times where our great grandchildren, the church that they grew up in, is going to be much different than the church that we see now if we don't teach. And if what we teach now is not being taught and taught again. We just scratched the surface because the preacher took up too much time in his sermon. Bad preacher. He didn't, but he took up too much. Let's have a prayer, and we'll be dismissed. Brother Pastor, would you close out?